it really is a great day for biofuels.
Hi, everybody. Thanks again for joining us here on the Comstock channel. I'm Marlin Bohling with you, and it's always a pleasure to have you with us as we talk about different kinds of agricultural stories each and every day. Today, my very special guest is Jacqui Fatka, and she happens to be a lead analyst of farm supply and biofuels for CoBank. She is based around Columbus, Ohio, I believe. Is that correct, Jacqui?
Yep. I like to say I am far enough north that I have this year a soybean field in my front yard. So a little bit farther away from the city, but not too far.
Okay. Well, the reason I invited Jacqui on board for this particular podcast here and discussion is the fact that we had that news item that came out late last week, and this is kind of in Jacqui's wheelhouse here. And if you recall, last week we ended with a flourish in the grain markets, and that was because of some new announcements that came out from EPA. And it had to do with RFS and some numbers related to RVOs. And Jacqui, this is something that hopefully you can explain. All year long, we've been talking about worries about 45Z regulations, and that's a whole different ball of wax over there. So talk to us, if you would, and explain what the meaning is of this news story that came out related to RVOs, because it built the market up on Friday, and then on a Monday, everything collapsed on the grains, and they gave it basically almost all of it back. Why? What is the deal with this anyway?
Well, those in the ag space know that we live in a world of acronyms. So we'll define the acronyms first. So RVO stands for the Renewable Volume Obligations, and that is part of the RFS, which is the Renewable Fuel Standard. And really, that RFS is a mandate from EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, another one of our favorite acronyms, or maybe not so favorite acronyms in rural America. That really sets the levels for biofuels. And, when you look back in 2005 was when the first RFS was passed by Congress. And a lot of times in my presentations that I give to CoBank customers and on behalf of CoBank, we talk about how, prior to 2005, corn prices were at like $2 corn, right? So this RFS in 2005, they updated again Congress in 2007. It really created a huge demand for, especially corn ethanol, to be blended into the fuel supply. And it's a mandate that fuel users had to blend so much biofuels. And so, really in the early stages of the RFS, ethanol really benefited greatly from that. The ethanol industry now is very stable. We're at over 10% in the gasoline supply. The EPA each year used to have to set those RVO levels every year, but they often were late, they were delayed. And so actually after the full life of 15 years of that, then the EPA shifted to what they've called a set rule, which is not just a yearly obligation requirement, but a several years. So the last set rule was actually 2023 through 2025. So we're in that set rule right now, but they just released last week what is coming for 2026 and 2027. But you think, oh, we're way ahead of it. But right now, they have to have a proposed rule. There'll be comments on the rule, and then they'll finalize it by November 1st, and then that'll go into effect for next year. So, big picture, this is an important driver of the corn market, not so much, because the ethanol industry is really pretty stable. So RVO, not as big of a deal, but a really big deal for the biomass-based diesel, which includes soy oil as a component. So you talked a little bit about that, the board and what we saw with soy oil prices and soy beans in general, because this is a significant demand piece for our domestic producers.
All right. So the story came out, and of course, we had soy oil going limit up and everything. And then it's like nobody cared on Monday when the markets reopened. It's like the enthusiasm was all gone. Did something change in the thinking of the regulation over the weekend, or what?
I don't think any. I think we all know that there's always ups and downs in the market, and it's hard to sustain a really strong up in an ag market, right? We know that there's a lot of times variations and things go up and things come down. I think really CoBank believes the base of this announcement is good, especially for soybean prices longer term, just from a demand pace. And also to soy oil will be benefited from this. This is a likely increased demand for soy oil. You mentioned 45Z, and we can talk about some of the nuances of that. The bottom line though, we've seen some, and this is because of the uncertainty around 45Z. The fact that I mentioned the set rule, the 2023 through 2025 set rule, established the baseline mandate for bio-based diesel, which includes renewable diesel and biodiesel, I should say, lower than what they actually produced. And so last year, the level was set at 3.35 billion. They had more than 4.7, between almost 5 billion gallons worth. So, they came into that 2023 through 2025 and they surpassed that limit on day one. So, this is that's part of the mandate. The purpose of the mandate is to drive demand and drive inclusion. And it's also a way for the government to support prices without actually paying a farmer a direct payment to prop up prices or help with inputs, right? So it's a market driver. Yes, I wish I could say, well, this is why. Also at the same time, Iran did have a bit of an issue, so oil prices are impacted. We've seen some changes on the board today with oil prices. There is a lot of correlation between our diesel prices, our renewable diesel biofuel prices, and gasoline prices because of the fact that they are all, a lot of times the trend is very similar on your corn oil and soy oil and diesel prices because of that.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. Things seem to change all the time. And I would say it's a fluid situation, but that's a bad pun. What about the regulations about this sustainable aviation fuel? There's been so much talk about that could save the industry, and that would really be good for the soy industry, of course, from the soy oil point of view, but it would be very helpful for the ethanol industry as well. SAF regulations, where do they come from?
All right, so we're going to back up a little bit and we'll talk about this. So we mentioned 45Z. So let's start with actually the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act had two incentives that were designed to encourage more sustainable fuels, both from sustainable aviation fuel as well as just your overall renewable diesel, and basically giving different tax credits based on the carbon intensity score. So a fuel that is more environmentally sustainable, that it would get a higher tax credit from the government. And I will say it's a tax credit, not necessarily a payment, right? You're not necessarily, and sometimes that is confused in the industry as well. So the Inflation Reduction Act was passed in 2022. One of those provisions was was a provision for SAF, which was 40B, and then that was just 2023 through 2024. There were some but the problem is that was released very late. It was actually released in May of 2024, so well into when it was supposed to be able to be in. Wasn't really the market push for SAF. 45Z is the clean fuel production tax credit, which has a higher tax credit for SAF fuels, as well as renewable diesel and different fuels, again, that have that CI. And when you talk about SAF, right now today, most of the SAF that's produced is the same feedstocks that are used to make renewable diesel. So a lot of times people talk about, well, why can't, ethanol is really going to be able to capitalize on the SAF market. The actual alcohol to jet process today is used just one plant with another one coming online. LanzaJet in Georgia is one that's using that. Gevo is another one that's pretty far advanced in the Dakotas there. But the cost for alcohol to jet is very uncompetitive. So the SAF mostly that's being produced today is used with the HEFA process, and the HEFA process is the same as the renewable diesel. So a renewable diesel facility can basically toggle back and forth of whether they want to produce SAF or if they want to produce renewable diesel. And that tax credit structures, the RIN markets, back to the renewable volume obligation, the RVOs, all of that is driving the economics for whether a renewable diesel plant would decide to make renewable diesel or SAF. And so again, just being able to create the market pull, the market incentives, the government, because some states have SAF incentives, like Minnesota, Nebraska is considering one. Then you have California that has its own low carbon fuel standard, which gives different incentives. And so you have all these different levers to try to encourage further adoption of SAF. And just on the whole premise of, there is a lot of potential for agriculture to benefit from SAF. The problem is today, we don't have the economics in place to really see this take off super fast. Going back to where we started this conversation, the RFS in 2005 really doubled our corn prices almost overnight. I mean, it took a couple of years, but it was an instant demand driver. Rural America saw a huge influx of money because of this new demand. SAF isn't there yet. We have a lot more years of the right pull from market incentives, offtake agreements. We've got to have an airline that says, yes, I want to buy that, as well as the policy structure, economics to get this to where we can really get it to lift off. So unfortunately, I don't see this especially for the alcohol to jet. It may be 6 to 10 years before we see that really explode with the SAF market.
Okay, you threw in another acronym there, RIN. We hear about that a lot, RIN. Explain that one too for our audience.
Okay, so the RIN is the Renewable Identification Number. So it's all part of the RFS. So every gallon, every biofuel gallon that is created and then blended gets a RIN value. The RIN, Renewable Identification Number. And the mandate forces compliance. So if you blend it, you either comply or you can sell that RIN and somebody else can buy it to be able to comply. And so, that's kind of the simplest way to explain a RIN, but that's also part of that stack. That's part of the RIN value that pushes and pulls actual production of the biofuels because they're trying to meet that mandate. Now, it's a market incentive, but it's a government mandate that has to be met. So if say a fuel provider doesn't meet the mandate, then they would be forced to pay a penalty because they don't have that. So that's where that RIN market comes in. That's why I don't want to get too far in the weeds because it gets really confusing fast, but each type of biofuel also has a different RIN value. Because one of the nuances of what they did last week in the RVO announcement, they changed the value of the RIN to be a little less. It won't be a huge deal, but it'll be something that we'll be watching to see if that. And then they also discounted it. So any imported feedstocks, they get a 50% value of that RIN. So if the RIN is 1.6 for bio-based mass diesel, if it's an import in on the biodiesel, it would only be worth a 0.8. So again, that's trying to encourage domestic use of those and also to the building up our domestic soy and corn producers, trying to drive demand for those feedstocks here domestically.
So how much volume have we currently been using biofuels, for diesel and also for ethanol?
So the total, and that's why I want to make sure I've got my my numbers straight. The total that we have out is, the new level has a total renewable fuel level of 22.33 gallons. So about 15 billion gallons is the ethanol mandate, the conventional ethanol. And then these advanced biofuels, we've talked about cellulosic ethanol for a lot of years and not seen a lot of that. But, these biomass-based diesel, advanced biofuels, even the SAF, all of those would fall into those higher levels. So, about of the 22 billion, 15 billion of is corn ethanol, and then the rest is other different fuels.
Yeah, it sounds like the cellulosic thing, it just really never did really get much traction, did
Yep.
it? And that kind of played into this.
Well, and I think, we always thought it's 5 to 7 years off, but you have to have the investment. You have to, the thing with cellulosic, a lot of times it was a lot of mass. And so being able to store that mass, we just couldn't get the cost structure in a way that really uh, allowed it to take off. And, that's, again, the role of the market incentives, private investment, public investment, outside investors of being able to look at a process and really helping it get off the ground. And that's one thing. We're in a lot of pre-commercial stages right now, not even, pre-commercial, very small facilities when we're looking at SAF. Again, there's a lot of potential there, but could it end up just like what we thought was cellulosic? Maybe, right? Like, we don't know the right technology. We don't know necessarily the best feedstocks. Most of what we are seeing today is what's, able to be either renewable diesel or sustainable aviation fuel. But without a mandate, right? There's no mandate here in the U.S. for SAF. In the Europe market, though, they do have a 2% mandate for SAF. So some of the domestic SAF producers are actually starting to ship that SAF overseas to the UK or to the EU that have just now implemented their own mandate and are starting to increase that over the next several years. And so we're going to see where that future demand is. Last year we were at total SAF worldwide of 0.17% of total airline fuel. This year we're at 0.30%. 2023 versus 2024. So this is a drop in the bucket of SAF use right now. But the idea is to try to increase that. There's a lot of opportunity too in the maritime shipping industry for potentially using these decarbonized fuels and more opportunities for hopefully U.S. producers to take advantage of that as well.
Jacqui, there's been a lot of arguing and verbal fighting, I guess, if you will, over the years about what they call small refinery exemptions. Just wondered if you could take a moment and explain what that's all about and where we stand in that right now.
So when the RFS was written, it was supposed to help allow for exemptions for what they called small refineries. So if a small refinery said, I can't meet that mandate, I can't comply with that, I can't afford to purchase these RINs because I'm not doing them myself, it would allow them to ask for an exemption from from EPA. So what we saw over, right now, there's actually 169 SREs, another acronym, but that is a small refinery exemptions of that EPA must decide what to do. And those are over a decade, because part of this ongoing, I guess you'd say maybe just a back and forth on SREs. You've had some administrations who have denied those, and then the people will take them to court, or both sides, right? So sometimes they get approved and they go to legal challenge, and sometimes they're denied and go to a legal challenge. And the bottom of this whole issue is the fact that it essentially eliminates some of the demand if they allow the exemption, because basically they're saying you don't have to comply, so it lessens the mandate. It like kind of waters it down in some way, right? But if you force compliance, then they have to pay. And so right now the RVO that the decision, that this proposal that came out, said that EPA could go anywhere from 0 to 18 billion gallons. So, I mean, think about that. The total is 22 billion gallons just for a year. Now, do they go back all the different years and take that off past years? We don't know exactly what they're going to do on the SREs. EPA did say that they will make a decision on those by the final rule time. And again, the importance of knowing where it is if it's going to be reallocated, or if it will just, if they'll basically bump up or put a cushion on whatever the final ones are. There's still some unknowns, but what I'm hearing from the industry is that They are welcoming the fact that they're going to make a decision on the SRE, maybe try to take some of that uncertainty out around whether things would be approved or not. It's just one more layer of nuance within this regulation that sometimes makes it a little hard to understand.
Some folks worry that these regulations would fall under, I guess, what you would call a green category, and they wonder if maybe the current administration is not really so friendly toward that, that they want to get away from that type of thing. Do you think that this administration is still supportive of the biofuels industry or not?
So I would say two things. One, the start of RFS in 2005 and 2007. That wasn't very long after 9/11. And so really the main push then was national security. And I think you're starting to hear that again from this administration, and also building up our own domestic industry to be able to support farmers. There's no hiding that Trump does enjoy being able to be liked by farmers. Farmers supported him at the ballot box. And so I think, this is not necessarily doesn't have to be an environmental play, right? I think there is the role of supporting rural America is very evident as you look back at the history of the RFS and the support that it has brought without a direct payment coming down from the government to help the industry, the ag industry as a whole. The second thing, because a lot of this is intertwined, we talked about the 45Z regulation, and that really was part of the Inflation Reduction Act that the Democrats passed under their reconciliation bill that does have an environmental focus. And I would say that the Democrats would focus on that environmental benefit in their discussions, but we've found that Republicans, the ones who benefit from really 45Z, are in a lot of those red states. And, there is still an economic importance that they're trying to stress, that it's not just a green, it's not just green. And, maybe there's ways to encourage and support that has a multi-benefit opportunity, right? Like it can support the economics of the farming community as well as offer some environmental benefits. And even if the government isn't requiring some of these greenhouse gas emission reductions, a lot of companies are, and a lot of companies are trying to reduce their overall footprint. And so this allows the agricultural supply chain to participate in that as well.
Well, Jacqui, I certainly appreciate you coming on and explaining all these difficult issues to our audience. Appreciate that very much. You're very well versed in that, and you do a good job explaining that. So I may call on you again if we have new developments come out along these lines, because you seem to be able to interpret all these terms and break them down for us. So thank you so much for what you do and explaining everything, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Absolutely. Would love to talk with you on behalf of CoBank. We have a lot of customers in this space, and, it really is a great day for biofuels, I think, from our announcement on Friday. And even though markets are down, I think overall we're going to see some good come from this if this is finalized as expected here come this fall.
Awesome. Thank you, Jacqui. Jacqui Fatka with us. She is from CoBank in Ohio. And that'll do it for this episode. Thank you again for joining us. I appreciate that so much. For producer Brianne Jenkins, I'm Marlin Bohling. We'll catch you next time here on the Comstock Channel. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and/or options is substantial, and each investor and/or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.